I was driving across the country for a kind of hectic trip, one that had me juggling multiple tasks. I had to get some things done for work at an office way up in Maine. While I was on the road, I figured I could also visit some of my friends and family on the East Coast. It seemed like the perfect chance to make the long drive worthwhile. By the fourth day of my journey, I had already driven through a lot of Pennsylvania. The state had a few interesting towns, but for the most part, the drive had been endless stretches of nothingness. The route I was taking forced me onto a series of side roads, narrow, one-lane highways that wound through dense woods and hilly terrain. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the rain started to fall steadily. I was feeling the fatigue of the long journey. My fuel was running low, and I hadn't passed a gas station in what felt like hours. The thought of running out of gas in the middle of nowhere sent a chill down my spine, especially since I hadn't seen a town in what seemed like forever. I kept hoping that one would pop up soon. But just as the frustration began to set in, I saw a sign. A gas station up ahead. I could barely make out the faded letters through the heavy rain and thick fog. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by unease as I pulled off the road. The station was small, nestled off to the side, hidden among the trees. It only had 2 pumps and a tiny, outdated concession building behind them. Still, it was a gas station, my lifeline at this point. I parked next to the first pump and got out, my shoes squelching in the wet ground. I tried to swipe my card, but the machine didn't even respond. I wiped the screen clean, but it remained dark and lifeless. I figured it was just a malfunction, so I walked to the second pump. It was also out of service. Frustration bubbled up inside me. The rain was relentless, and the night was settling in faster than I had anticipated. The gas station was old, but it didn't look much different from a lot of the ones I'd seen in small towns. Still, something felt off about the whole place. As I scanned the area, I noticed a faint light coming from inside the concession building. Maybe someone was working inside. Maybe they could help me. I didn't have many options, so I stepped out from under the overhang that covered the pumps and quickly jogged toward the building. The rain hit my face hard as I reached for the door handle. It screeched open, and as I stepped inside, a strange, suffocating feeling washed over me. The place was eerily quiet. The shelves were empty, some knocked over, as though the store had been abandoned in a hurry. The air was thick with dust, and everything looked like it had been left to decay for years. But there was a light flickering from the back of the building. It wasn't the bright, sterile fluorescent light you would expect in a store. No, it was more like a lamp, casting a dim, yellowish glow. Felt wrong, out of place. My stomach twisted with unease. I only stood there for a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Something wasn't right. I quickly stepped back outside, my heart pounding in my chest. As I turned back toward my car, I froze. There was someone standing next to it. A man. He was drenched, just like me, his clothes sticking to his body as he peered into the windows, examining my car as if searching for something. "Hey, what are you doing?" I called out, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. He didn't respond. He just looked at me, then shifted his eyes behind me. I turned, my body stiff with fear. The front door of the concession building had creaked open, and a figure emerged into the rain. It was a man with long, wet black hair, his skin pale and sickly. He didn't hesitate. Without a second of assessment, he started running toward me, his movements fast and erratic. The man next to my car took a few steps back, but I didn't care about him anymore. My focus was solely on the approaching figure, the one with the cold, empty eyes. I dove into the car and slammed the door shut. The man reached my car just as I locked the door, his hands slamming against the window, his face twisted with rage. He tried the door handle, but I was already moving, my foot slamming down on the gas pedal. A loud, metallic scrape vibrated through the car as I pulled away, my heart hammering in my chest. I sped back onto the road, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, but the man didn't follow. I didn't look back, though. Couldn't. I had to get away. After another half hour of driving in the rain, I could feel the car sputtering, running on fumes. The fuel gauge was on empty, and my stomach dropped as I realized I was about to run out of gas. But luckily, I still had cell service. I pulled off the road and called for help, waiting anxiously in the dark. As I sat there, waiting for assistance, I looked at the side of my car. My eyes widened in horror. There, across the door, was a long scratch. It was deep, like something or someone had dragged a knife down the side of the car when I drove off. I shuddered at the thought. Later that night, the police confirmed my worst fear. The gas station I had stopped at had been out of service for over a decade. It had been abandoned long before I ever arrived. But the thing that haunted me most was the question that lingered. What would have happened if I hadn't left when I did? I still don't have an answer, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is that I got out in time. And that's a thought that still sends a chill down my spine every time I drive through the rain at night. When I was a kid, between the ages of 14 and 16, my friends and I were really into hanging out anywhere other than our houses. Most of the time, we'd go to some fast food place and chill there, or just find some spot in the woods near the park. I guess we were at that age where we wanted to be alone, not have people looking over our shoulders all the time. The only problem with this was that on the weekends, when we'd be out late, most stores and dining areas closed before we were ready to call it a night. During one winter break, we ran into this problem a lot. We'd go to the parks to hang out, only to find that even in the late hours of the night, there would be multiple other groups that had the same idea. Then, one night, my friend JT brought up his parents' old farmhouse, saying it could be a cool spot to explore and that nobody else would be there. He'd mentioned it a few times before, but we never thought much of it until that night. JT drove me and our other friend, Paul, out into what looked like the middle of nowhere. We arrived at a wooden fence, closed off with a chain since it was private property, and JT didn't have the key to it. So we parked and hopped over. From the edge of the wooden fence, though, the first thing I realized was that I couldn't see the farmhouse. Yeah, it was dark out and there were no lights anywhere, but I couldn't even make out the shape of the house in any direction. JT started walking, leading the way down a rough gravel path, as he explained why his parents even had the place to begin with. He said it was his grandparents' farmhouse, but when they died, they passed it down to his parents. Apparently, it was in horrible condition, and his parents didn't know what to do with it, so they just kept it. That was almost 10 years ago. Nobody had done any maintenance or even checked up on it in over a decade. We walked down this path, following JT for a good 10 minutes before we could finally see the house. Even from just the outline of it in the dark, you could tell it was in bad shape. Part of the roof was dipping inward like it was about to collapse, and some of the siding panels were hanging off the wooden frame. All of us were quiet now, just looking at it as we walked closer. When we got up to the front of the house, the door was covered by a large sheet of wood, so we went around to the back where the door was completely missing. We each turned on our phone flashlights and stepped inside. Surprisingly, the place wasn't really trashed like we thought it would be. Most of the furniture and stuff didn't seem to have been moved very much. It was extremely dusty, though, and our phone lights weren't the best, so maybe it just looked better than it actually was. We split up after a minute, walking around the first floor and looking. I entered a hallway on the left side of the house and began walking down when suddenly, someone walked past the end of the hallway. I froze, and out of panic, I called out, "JT," as if it was maybe him, but I already knew it wasn't. The man I saw, although it was dark, was much taller and thinner than either of my friends. I stepped back and started to go where I'd last seen the two of them. When I turned around the corner and held up my light, both JT and Paul were standing in the middle of the room, looking away from me. I stepped into the room and looked where their lights were pointing. At the edge of the light, the man was standing and staring right back at them. It was like they were all frozen in fear, unsure of what to make of the situation. "Guys, let's just leave," I said shakily, but I tried to act calm so the guy wouldn't do anything. But that must have triggered everyone's reactions because suddenly we were all sprinting to the back door, running out into the open field. I can't even say for sure if the man chased us out, but JT says he was confident he heard footsteps right behind him. We pretty much ran straight back to the car and drove off, not taking any more risks. I think we can all assume that the man was just a squatter or homeless person defending the place he calls home. But without a good look at him, it's hard to say for sure. JT said he'd tell his parents about it so they could lock down the farmhouse, but he never went through with it because he was worried about getting in trouble for going there. Whatever happened that night remains the most horrifying experience I've had. And if JT was right and the man was trying to chase us, then we got really lucky to have all gotten out unharmed. Last year was my senior year of high school. My friend group was always full of dumb ideas. All it took was a boring weekend night for us to go out and find something to entertain us. That's exactly what happened this night. It was just me and my two other friends hanging out, trying to think of something to do. One of them, Mikey, had been talking about this abandoned place nearby for the past few weeks. We had pushed it off for a while, but now with nothing else to do, it didn't sound like that bad of an idea to go exploring. He said it was a house on the edge of town where all the farmland was, but aside from the location, that was about all he knew. My other friend and I shrugged and said, "Why not?" Within 15 minutes, we were on the road. We drove for about half an hour until we reached the point where Mikey said to turn off onto an unpaved road. A few minutes later, we exited the tree line and found ourselves right in front of the house. It was massive, a very large house with a huge plot of abandoned farmland surrounding it. We got out of the car, each grabbed a flashlight, and approached the front door. I turned the knob, and it was unlocked, but when I tried to shove it open, it was blocked by something heavy on the other side. We went around to the back and tried the back door, but that one was locked. With no other choice, we resorted to crawling through a busted window on the side of the house. As soon as we were inside, a strong, awful smell hit us. It was like a mixture of mold and rotting animal carcass. I mean, this was the worst smell I had ever experienced, by a long shot. My friends didn't seem as fazed as I was, so we kept moving. Right away, we noticed footprints all throughout the dusty hallway floors. We thought nothing of it at first, assuming this place had been a tourist attraction for stupid teenagers like us, visiting to check out the abandoned house. The place was unnervingly empty, though. There wasn't any old furniture or garbage on the floor. As we walked through the first few rooms, we reached the hallway that led to the front door. Against the front door was an old couch with a bunch of boxes stacked on top of it. Whoever had done that seemed to have taken everything from inside the house, just to block the front door from opening. It was strange, but we continued up the stairs to see if the upstairs rooms were empty too. At the top of the steps, I shined my flashlight down the hallway. There were 3 doors. We opened the first 2, and they were both empty bedrooms. Then I opened the 3rd door, and not surprisingly, it was empty too. But this room was much smaller than the others. The reason this confused all of us was because there were no more rooms next to it. So, based on the layout of the house, it was easy to assume that this room was supposed to be double the size of the others. There were no more doors, nothing left to see. We started back down the stairs, but as we got halfway down, we all heard the same thing. It sounded like a ball hitting the floor, rolling, then quickly and intentionally being stopped. Came from upstairs, where we had just been. Cautiously, we checked each of the rooms again, but found nothing. All of us hearing the exact same thing made it extra odd. We all knew it happened, but there was nothing upstairs. After that, we were all getting uncomfortable, so we quickly left the house through the same window we came in from. We walked to the front, where the car was, and got in. Just before I pulled out, though, I noticed something. 2 windows upstairs on the left side of the house. I specifically remembered that the small room we were confused by only had 1 window. I pointed this out to my friends, and we all sat there, staring at the second-floor windows, trying to figure out what was going on. Then, there was a sudden flicker of a shadow moving across the blinds, followed by a dim light glowing from behind the window. In the light, the figure of a man could be seen, looking out the window at us. The car did a U-turn and sped down the dirt road, getting out of there as fast as possible. After some discussion, Mikey convinced us to call the police, but when they arrived, they found nothing in the house. Whoever had been there had moved out, probably taking everything with them. When I think back on it now, I'm just happy that we didn't try too hard to search for any more rooms when we were upstairs. If we had, I wouldn't doubt it that whoever was hiding in that house would have been prepared to take drastic measures to keep us from finding them.